Hello everyone, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Michael Kuhlman. I'm the director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute. I would like to invite Ambassador Mark Green, the Wilson Center's president and CEO, to the podium to offer some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you here. As you know, the Wilson Center is a unique place in foreign policy. We are congressionally chartered, we are scholarship-driven, and we're fiercely nonpartisan and independent. And I always say that that special status creates special obligations. To not duplicate what others are doing, but instead to prioritize the most important issues and opportunities, and to do so in ways which we can make a difference and hopefully add value, which makes this the perfect place for today's discussion. Now, Pakistan is always a country that's worthy of our time and attention. It's the world's fifth most populous nation. It sits in a highly strategic space off the Arabian Sea and in the wider Indian Ocean region. It has close relations with a range of key global players, from China to Saudi Arabia, and it has had a long, though sometimes troubled, alliance with the U.S. For our part, Pakistan is an important country for the Wilson Center, and it has been a major focus of our work for decades. One clear example of that is our annual Pakistan Residential Fellowship Program. It brings a Pakistani thought leader to Washington to spend 9 months working on a policy-relevant research project. It's a one-of-a-kind fellowship, and we're not aware of anything quite like it here in Washington. I'm grateful to the supporters of this important line of work. Some of them are here with us today. Masadik Chugdi and Faisal Shahandi, thank you so much for your generosity in helping to make this happen. I'm also delighted to welcome to the Wilson Center Pakistan's Finance Minister, His Excellency Mohammad Aurangzeb, for today's discussion on Pakistan's economy. As the minister can attest, Pakistan's economy has experienced several challenges in recent years. Yet in recent months, it has shown signs of bouncing back. With reduced inflation and improved foreign reserves, Pakistan's policymakers have also made important privatization reforms. And last month, the country finalized a new assistance package with the IMF. But Pakistan's economy remains in a tough spot due to external debt and other challenges, both old and new. In short, this is a crossroads moment, especially for the country's many millions of young people. Pakistan's median age is 20. 2/3 of its population is under the age of 30. In other words, quite literally, the majority of Pakistanis have a major stake in the country's long-term economic stabilization. At this crucial moment, we are delighted to be hosting the finance minister. He will offer his thoughts on the state of the economy, his government's efforts to strengthen it, and the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. My colleague, Michael Kuhlman, director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute, will then join the stage to moderate a discussion and a question and answer session. I hope that by the time our 1 hour together is done, you will leave with a better understanding of Pakistan's economy and what its government is looking to do to stabilize the economy both now and into the future. But before we begin, a few words about our esteemed guest. He does not come from the political world, which is a great thing. He is as a recovering politician. He is a banker. Before becoming finance minister this past March, he served for over 35 years in the international banking world, most recently as president and CEO of the Pakistan bank HBL. He was also CEO of JP Morgan's Global Corporate Bank for the Asia-Pacific region. He has served as chairman of the Pakistan Banks Association and of the Pakistan Business Council. He received his MBA from the Wharton School. Mr. Minister, we are truly proud to host you, and we look forward to this conversation. Welcome. Please.
Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'll make, as you said, a few opening remarks to sort of set the context, and both in terms of where we are on the economic front, but more importantly, where we are headed. And after that, it'll be a pleasure to take your comments, questions. Now, over the last sort of 12 to 14 months, we have made some very tangible progress in terms of the macroeconomic stability. By the time we got done in our fiscal year, and our fiscal year is from July 1 to June 30th, we had manifestations of this macroeconomic stability through various markers, which all went on in the right direction. After 19 years, we had a primary surplus on the fiscal side. Our current account deficit was less than $1 billion. If you put it in context, this was, both the governor of the central bank and the finance secretary have also joined. But this current account deficit was close to $17 billion only 2 or 3 years back. We have stable currency. The foreign exchange reserves at the end of June, which had dipped to 2 weeks of import cover in sort of June of 23, had recovered to 2 months of import cover at the end of June of this year. Inflation was on a downward trajectory, and we saw the beginning of the policy rate coming down, and we saw the first reduction coming through before the fiscal year was out. And as a result of this macroeconomic stability, while the letters of credit and other contracts were in a good shape, but we were behind in terms of dividend and profit remittances of our international investors. And as a result of this macroeconomic stability and what we were able to do, we repaid a little over $2 billion in May and June to our existing international investors. And so we started this fiscal year on a relatively clean slate and a relatively good note. Now, in the first quarter of this fiscal year, which ended in September of this year, we have consolidated those gains. So all the markers that I mentioned in the last fiscal year, including the current account, on the back of very strong remittances, on the back of a stable currency, the IT exports holding very strong. We had a current account surplus 2 months in a row in August and September. So, but the real story and happy story is the inflation. It had peaked at 38%, and in September, it touched 6.9%. On the back of that, we've seen an overall reduction of 450 basis points in the policy rate. This is very much the domain of the central bank. But now, given that the real and positive interest rate is in sort of the 10% marker, we are hoping there'll be further reduction as we go through the fiscal year. But the more important thing is that as far as the industry is concerned, as far as the general population is concerned, yes, the policy rate is 17.5%, but 6-month CIBOR, which is the reference rate on which we do most of the lending and borrowing, was at 14.65%, 6-month CIBOR, a few days back. And a number of companies right now, because the banks are flush with liquidity, are actually borrowing sub-CIBOR. So things have moved in the right direction in terms of the financing, not only availability, but also the pricing and the affordability of it as well. The 6.9% inflation rate is now at a 44-month low. Now, During this period, we have also seen the credit ratings upgrading us. So we are now in sort of the triple C plus range. We still have to get back into Committee of Nations to at least start moving towards B minus. So we are keeping that engagement going with the rating agencies at the highest level, between Governor, myself, Secretary of Finance. During this week as well, we'll meet S&P, Moody's, and Fitch as well, because we are keen to get back into the international capital markets, and for that, moving towards B minus rating is going to be important. We have also seen the return of the institutional flows back into the country, both on the debt side and on the equity side. And yesterday, the stock market again hit an all-time high, the index, and so these are all good data points, sort of providing essentially external validation that our direction of travel is right, and we are moving in the right direction. Now, all of this was on the back of the successful conclusion of the 9-month SBA which we had with the fund. When I was here in April during the spring meetings, at that point in time, we had agreed as government that we will, once the SBA is done, we will engage with the fund for an extended and a larger program. And that's the discussion which got triggered. Back in April, we ended up signing a staff level agreement in July, and then on September 25, the IMF board gave the approval for a $7 billion 37-month program. Now, why were we looking for this? For two reasons. One, to bring permanence to the macroeconomic stability. So all of those of you who have followed Pakistan, and you said you've been covering it for decades, so you know our boom and bust cycles very well. So this permanence is extremely important. And from my perspective, this macroeconomic stability is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. We need this foundation on which we can then sort of move towards building and going for growth, and I'll come back to that in a moment over the next sort of 2 to 3 years. So that was one part of it, and as I said, we're seeing some initial results of that. I mentioned the policy rate coming down, the credit upgradings, the dividend profit repatriation, institutional flows, but we've also seen some of the FDI coming into the country. Let's put it this way, it's trickling in. So I don't think we can declare success or victory. It's trickling in. So we saw Gunvor, we saw Aramco, we saw BYD coming in terms of joint ventures, and so there's that which is sort of beginning to happen. Also, because there's a lot of discussion around, what happens to the debt and whether it's sustainable or not, and maybe that comes up during the Q&A session as well. So first of all, overall, our debt to GDP, which was 75%, has come down to 67%. But also, the composition of our external debt is now primarily multilaterals and bilaterals. And it's now about $98 billion. As far as domestic situation is concerned, given the macroeconomic stability, given the profit repatriation coming from the state bank back into the government, we were able to retire close to 1 trillion rupees in domestic debt. We have bought back debt. We have cancelled a number of auctions, essentially to give a signal to the market that A, we are in no desperation to borrow. Number two, if we are to borrow, we will borrow at our terms. And the third thing is that the banks need to start lending to the private sector. So the entire discussion about crowding out, etc., is beginning to move in the right direction as well. Now, Ambassador, you mentioned this, and I will put it in the context of our structural reforms, that this is indeed a defining moment for the country. Even in the private sector, I used to say, we have known the what and why for the longest time. Of course, we always would welcome good advice, but there have been papers after papers after papers, right? I mean, the IFIs have written about it. The World Bank, when Alango was there, they came up with a very good study as to how Pakistan can move from a $300 billion economy to a $3 trillion economy by the time we get to be 100, which is 2047. So the what and why has been known for a very long time. We just don't do it. Is the how part of it where we are missing in action. Even the document that we have signed between the governor and myself a few weeks back, if you compare it, these are all public documents, right? I mean, once the executive board approves it, it gets uploaded to their website. And Michael, you must have been reviewing these documents if you're following Pakistan. But if you see what we have signed this time around, maybe it's a bit more because the program is front-loaded. But otherwise, in terms of the structural benchmarks, and that's where these structural reforms come in, you'll find hardly any difference since the time I've come back to the country, which was 2018, and my three predecessors over this 6-year period more or less signed the same document. And those structural reforms are really in 3 areas, starting with taxation. So tax to GDP, where we are as a country languishing between 9 to 10%. So what we are committed is to move it towards north of 13% or 13.5% over the period of the program. And I'll come back to that as well. Then the energy reforms, especially in our power sector. And the third one is the SOE reforms, and moving with the privatization agenda. And the last thing which I will touch on are sort of our public finances. Now, as far as the taxation part is concerned, I've said that since the time I've assumed this position, that Pakistan is actually a very giving country. The amount of philanthropy which happens in Pakistan is just absolutely amazing. But philanthropy can help universities, they can run hospitals. You can't run countries on the back of philanthropy. You have to pay taxes. And again, I do think this sort of 13.5% will take us towards a sustainable range. And last year was a good year. I mean, our tax revenues went up by 29%. Hence, that played an important role in the primary surplus that we had. This year, as I said, the program is front-loaded. The expectation is for taxes to go up, tax revenues to go up by 40%. In the first quarter, we have done reasonably well in terms of staying close to the target. But we are doing a number of things there. One, so reforming our tax authority in terms of people, process, technology. Because a lot of people don't have trust or faith in our tax authority in terms of corruption, in terms of leakages, in terms of harassment. So a number of those things have to be in place in terms of, and one of the key things that we are trying to do is sort of end-to-end digitalization, so that we can reduce the level of human intervention. We can bring in more transparency, use data analytics, and hopefully over a period of time improve our client service as well, so that we can, as I said, bring that confidence back in the tax authority. The other thing, obviously, is bringing undertaxed and untaxed segments back into the net, whether it's real estate, whether it's agriculture, whether it's retail and wholesale distributors. The third thing is compliance and enforcement. We have various estimates of the leakage or theft, which through better enforcement can help us getting to this ratio. And the last thing is what we have just signed with the provinces is the National Fiscal Pact, because some of these taxation elements are in the purview of the provinces. So I'm very grateful to the 4 chief ministers who worked with us to sign that in terms of revenue, in terms of expenditure, and in terms of governance. And the governance part is very important because it took us a little while to get off the grey list of FATF, and we don't really want to go back into it. So the robustness around this KYC, AML, sanctions, transaction monitoring, all of that has to be whole of the government approach, not just the federal government. So there are a number of things, and I can expand on that if there are any questions around it, which we are doing and taking around taxation. And the second one is, of course, the energy and the power sector is absolutely critical that we fix it if we have to get back onto the growth trajectory, both in terms of availability, which is actually there, but more importantly, the affordability in terms of rationalization of the tariff structures. But again, it requires a fundamental rethink and fundamental transition and transformation, as I just talked about the tax authority as well. So what we've done is so far in terms of changing the boards of the distribution companies or discos, it took us a while. We wanted to do it in the first month of the new administration. But when we went around along with the power minister to change the boards, we were told, no, you'll have to go through a very long process of inquiry before you ask someone to step down. So we then requested the president, and we had a presidential ordinance which got challenged in the courts. Then we had to go to the parliament to have the laws amended. So it's only about a month back that we got private sector SMEs onto the board. So now roughly 80% of our discos are such that their majority are people from the private sector. The chairpersons, chairmen are from the private sector. Political appointees and government nominees are now in a minority. And then the whole privatization. So the first 3 discos are now in phase 1 of the privatization sort of discussion at this point in time as well, and I'll come back to that in a moment as well. But we are, on the generating side, and then of course we have a monopoly in terms of government buying the electricity. So for the next, we've already initiated that discussion in the cabinet to move towards competitive market in terms of electricity purchase. So all of that is sort of work in progress. The third thing is SOE reforms and privatization. So I chair the Cabinet Committee on SOEs, and there over the last few months, we have been asking the various ministries to come in and essentially justify why these entities, because it's not only the ministries, it's the attached departments and everything else which is associated with those ministries, should be in the public sector. As you can appreciate, almost everyone came in saying that everything that they have is strategic and essential. So we had to sort of push back, and the message is very clear that the government has no business in being in business. We should provide policy framework and policy continuity, and it should really be the private sector which leads the country. And therefore, it was not only a question of just the SOEs which are loss-making, to move them towards privatization or closing them down, but also the profitable SOEs. An example of that would be insurance companies being run in the public sector. If an activity can be done in the private sector, there's no reason for that to be in the public sector. So despite a lot of pushback, etc., so we moved in that right direction. Privatization, early days. We have 2 assets in play at this point in time, the national airline. Now this should have been done decades back because now the amount of losses which we have sort of we have structured it as a holdco where we have parked all the bank debt, etc., because the PIA cannot service that debt, and then of course so is a good company which we are trying to privatize, and there's a bad company where the government has assumed the liability, at this point in time, and over a period of time, it has to be repaid. And the second thing, which is in play at the moment, is the outsourcing of the Islamabad airport. IFC is helping us on that, and we are hopeful that in the November timeframe we'll see some good outcomes. And then there's a whole pipeline which is there for the privatization side. The last thing here is around public finances, because one of the things which is clearly there and is a pushback that as we go for additional taxes, etc., that why the heck government is spending so much and why aren't you not reducing the expenditures, which I think is the right pushback. There are 3 or 4 initiatives which are underway right now. We've a federal government right-sizing committee, which I chair, along with some cabinet colleagues. And again, and as you know, this has been done. It's not the first time this attempt is being made. During the PTI administration, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, the former governor of the central bank, and under Mr. Imran Khan's administration, he was in the cabinet as part of the institutional reforms. And he had presented an entire plan to the cabinet at that point in time, back in June 2019, which never saw the light of the day. So what we've done, and learning from that experience, and I do talk to him quite often, is that we have said, let's make it a bit bite-sized. So we are now taking 5 or 6 ministries at a time, take it to the cabinet for the decisions. So the first 6 ministries, one, the cabinet decided to close down, merge 2 other, and then various decisions. And then we come with the implementation plan so that we sort of move forward on that side. Pension, as you know, has been a huge issue in terms of unfunded liability, and Finance Secretary is sitting here. I give him full credit for that, that we push that through, that at least we stop the bleeding. So as of July 1, all new colleagues joining on the government side are on defined contribution. We still have to take care of the stock, but at least, as I said, we stop the bleeding. Debt servicing, I've already sort of mentioned that. It's just now, as a result of the macro environment, this year we'll see improvement, but it's really the next fiscal year where we'll see the real upside sort of associated with that. Now, I mentioned all of this, but I don't want to leave you with the impression that everything is hunky-dory. There's huge pushback from all quarters. We are in coalition government, but as you can appreciate, and to put it in context, last year's total tax revenues were 9.4 trillion rupees after a 29% delta. And cash in circulation in Pakistan is 9 trillion. So when you're trying to move that into a documented affair, it's not surprising that there is going to be pushback from everywhere. So adjustment will be required in the short term. There will be pain in the short term. I say that in the cabinet as well. Some of my cabinet colleagues are not very happy with me around some of the decisions that are being made. And I respect them and I appreciate that. But the reality is, as a country, our hand has been forced. We need to do what we need to do. And especially, as everyone keeps on saying, we want to see this as a last fund program, and we are very frequent borrowers and users of the fund program. But it's these structural reforms which we never got to, because only that way we are going to get sustainability. I'll just close with one thing that, while I've just talked about the structural reforms which are absolutely required for the economic turnaround over the next 2 to 3 years, having said that, as a country, we are dealing with existential problems. Climate change being clearly one of those. The 2022 floods were sort of a rude awakening for everyone. But we had displacement of 33 million people, overall losses anywhere between $20 to $25 billion. The second one is population growth at 2.55%. Right, the urban number is actually 3.6%. The rural is slightly low. Can you imagine at 240 million people we're struggling? And if with this growth rate, if we get to 400 million plus, etc., it is not going to be easy. So these are, and then the last one, because on the human index side, etc., child stunting. And the reality is, what I have just described in terms of our reform agenda, we need to get it done to get onto a sustainable growth path. But if we can't deal with these existential issues in the medium to long term, the country will remain very susceptible to issues way after all of us are gone. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Aurangzeb, for a very useful and detailed appraisal of where things are and where things could be going. And I'm sure that your comments have sparked a number of questions from our audience. I just wanted to ask you one initial question before we open things up, and it'll involve returning to the FDI question. So your government has, of course, launched a new mechanism, the Special Investment Facilitation Council, or SIFC as it's known. It's meant to fast-track FDI into Pakistan. It's been projected, so far as I can see, as a major priority for the government as it looks to help stabilize the economy in the immediate term. Could you give us a bit of an update on the activities of SIFC, what investments it's been able to attract, and what its future plans are?
Yeah. So the SIFC has been in place for the last year or so. It really has two roles. One is facilitation, and facilitation is to cut down the red tape as much as we can. And secondly is being a central point, a single point for the investors to come in. It's chaired by the Prime Minister. The Chief of Army Staff is there. The four provincial chief ministers are there. And from my perspective, it's a very practical and pragmatic forum because when the investors come in, they might be dealing with the federal government, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Investment, etc., but the execution is in the provinces. So having that kind of upfront agreement makes sense, number one. Number two, in the international forums, I actually use Professor Kishore Mehbubani's point, because when he was once asked about Singapore and was asked how did Singapore go from a third world to a first world country, he said meritocracy, pragmatism, honesty. Meritocracy we understand. Honesty, I think we understand. Pragmatism was their form of democracy. So that's how I look at SIFC. At this point in time, Pakistan requires that kind of forum. Over a period of time when we get into a BAU mode, maybe its usefulness might not be around, but at this point in time, we absolutely need it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have a few other questions, but I know that we're going to have a number of questions from our audience, and I would like those to be posed, so I'll hold back on mine. So please wait until a microphone is in front of you before you ask your question, and if you could please keep it to one question in the interest of time. So if I could see a show of hands. Okay, we'll start right over here. Gentleman here in the second row.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Minister. Mohammed Kheshki from the Resource Group. I had a question on the sustainability of the current account surplus that you mentioned in the last 2 months. In Pakistan's case, I guess as we all know, exports have been particularly inelastic. So as a result, the surplus to deficit swings with imports. Now, in the case of, reduction of imports, how sustainable do you think that is in the sense that you need imports, particularly on the investment side, in order to promote growth? Do you see us swinging back into a current account deficit? And what do you think is the general dynamics around the current account, which drives so much around inflation, exchange rate, etc.? Thank you.
So I think there are obviously three components to it. I mentioned very, very strong remittance flow. And the reason for that is our stable currency, because a lot of flows which were going into the parallel market have now come back into the formal market. So that we are getting into a good $3 billion type of remittance flow almost every single month, and has been quite consistent over the last few months. The other thing is the Roshan digital account, right, which is yet another mechanism. And while it had dipped, a few months back, but it's come back very, very strongly. As far as the exports are concerned, you are right in terms of our traditional exports, whether it's textile, whether it's leather, they have been relatively stagnant over years. But what we saw during last fiscal year and what we continue to see this fiscal year is IT. Even in September or August, the IT exports went up 29% year on year. Agriculture last fiscal year was a very, very good year for us. I mentioned these two sectors because these two sectors are in our direct control. Nothing to do with IMF, nothing to do with the stabilization program, policies, financing, people, all in our control in terms of policy framework, policy continuity. So I do think we will see the sustainability of these two sectors, especially IT, is going to be a huge upside for the country as we go forward. Imports. Now there is a view, and the governor is sitting here as well. There is a view that some administrative measures are in place, and therefore the imports are artificially down, etc. That was the case in 22-23. When our import cover and FX reserves got impacted. During the last fiscal year and now, there are no administrative controls whatsoever, either from the central bank or from the government side. In fact, non-oil imports have gone back to the previous levels, which is around $3.1 to $3.2 billion. The oil imports are low because of one of the reasons is slower growth, but also the oil price being low in the international market as well. So from our perspective, we will keep a very close eye on this. And the reason for that is that we have to fundamentally change the DNA of the economy. Because the point that you make, what we have seen, and your research, I'm sure, is there as well. The moment we go close to 4 or above 4%, we get into trouble. Because we are import-led and import-dependent, we run out of foreign exchange, we get into a balance of payment problem, we go running back to the lender of the last resort. So unless we fundamentally change the DNA of the economy towards export-led discussion, both in terms of the industry but also FDI, it's not going to be there. But as of now, we feel quite comfortable in terms of the sustainability of the current account situation.
Thank you. Let's go to this gentleman here, and then we'll come to this side of the room.
Thank you very much, Michael. Hello, Mr. Sahib. Just a couple of interconnected, one question, just with two. Since last 2 years, being from Peshawar, I see Afghanistan's economy in a much better shape than Pakistan. The dollar rate is much better over there, although you're using very complicated words, but I want to know why is that? Especially keeping in view that whenever rulers come in Pakistan, they have such huge expenditures. People from Washington, D.C., when they look at us, they wonder, how do we beg with such a beautiful smile? Like, they really wonder when they're at home. They don't tell you that, but they really wonder that. Second thing is, with the economy, justice system is also, today we have a journalist colleague who was killed 2 years ago. Till today, his justice is not served. Today is the second anniversary. My personal example, $1.5 billion property, living since 40 years on it. 4 years ago, somebody did some paperwork in it. It's been 4 years now, but a 40-year property. Justice and this over-expenditure with Afghanistan comparison, these two questions are.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer some of your questions, because I would certainly not agree with you that Afghanistan's economy is doing better than Pakistan. So we have a fundamental disagreement, but you'll have to call the finance minister of Afghanistan to ask him around what is happening there, because you just brought one marker, but we have to look at the broader picture. And I spent at least 10 to 15 minutes explaining around our macroeconomic stability and where we are. I also made an attempt in terms of what the federal government is doing in terms of reducing our expenditure. And I started by saying it's a fair observation, it's a fair pushback that we need to bring down the federal government expenditure, and it's through right sizing, through pension, through debt servicing, etc., which we will continue to work on. I'm just not in a position to talk about the legal aspects, not my domain.
Sure. Thank you. Let's come down here, right to here.
Thank you, Minister. My name is Jumaina Siddiqui. I'm a Pakistan Watcher analyst. Have worked on the country for over 20 years through various development organizations. You mentioned climate change as an existential threat. The 26th Amendment, for all of its changes, added Article 9A saying that every person should be entitled to a healthy, safe, and clean environment, which I think requires a whole-of-government approach, including the finance ministry. Can you comment on deliberations or efforts around debt swaps and access to climate financing, and especially in the lead-up to COP29? What is the strategy or the planned strategy for the Pakistani government?
Right.
Thank you.
So I think there are two aspects to it. One is from the government's perspective, the policy part in terms of what we're doing in terms of NDCs. Although we just have contribute 1%, less than 1% in terms of global emissions, but we still need to do what we need to do in terms of bringing the emission regime down. So those are very much there. The other is the National Adaptation Plan, because for us, it's really adaptation which is more critical, and whether it's water management, whether it's climate smart agriculture aspects are being developed, and we are working on that. I think the real question is around financing, and there the work is cut out for the government. Even if you see in terms of the floods that we had back in 2022, there were enough pledges which came through the Geneva conference. At that time, I was in the private sector, but a lot of that could not materialize, and the reason for that was there was a very small component of grants, and a lot of it was around project and project financing. And as a country, we do not do a good job in terms of coming up with projects which the international community feels right, are the right projects in terms of not only their structure, but also the monitoring and the reporting mechanism. Now, we are going to be talking to the fund and the World Bank with respect to climate resiliency. We needed to have the EFF in place, and then we needed to start these discussions. But I can tell you, President Ajay Banga is in the country partnership framework that we are working with his team, is very keen to work with Pakistan on some of these issues, including climate change, including child stunting. His whole thing is, don't come with a gunshot approach. I need this, I need this, I need that. Prioritize things, and we will prioritize climate finance on that. And the last thing I I was there at the G24 and V20 forums yesterday. We need to operationalize a lot of stuff. What happened in Sharm el-Sheikh in terms of loss and damage fund, a little bit of movement in COP28 around that, but in 15 days when people meet in Azerbaijan, we really need to operationalize it so that countries like Pakistan can benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's several questions online from our online viewers about China. One of them relates to the Chinese debt. What is the total amount of Chinese debt that Pakistan is looking to get reprofiled? And there's also a question about your interest in Pakistan selling panda bonds, receiving bids from Chinese firms back over the summer. Could you provide an update on that? So that and the question about reprofiling Chinese debt.
Yeah. So in terms of Chinese obligations, let's be very clear. What we have initiated in terms of discussion is around the IPP debt. I just want to make sure it's not overall debt. It's just related to IPPs, related to what we want to do in the power sector in terms of providing relief on the tariff side over the next few years. So it is reprofiling, it's not restructuring, because there's no discussion about any haircut or anything. We're just requesting maturity extensions. Early days, we have appointed an advisor which is working with sort of 10 projects which are there under the Chinese IPP umbrella. I would say that over the next few months, we expect to make and see progress because it's obviously talking to the sponsors, which are SOEs, and talking to the lenders. But that process has been initiated around reprofiling of the Chinese IPP debt. The second thing on Panda, I just mentioned that we do want to access Euro and Reg S 144A markets once we get into the B- category. But this fiscal year, we are indeed keen to access the Chinese capital markets, which is the second largest and second most liquid market in the world. And from our perspective, it's diversification of the funding base. And also, at this point in time, we want to have a print. Necessarily, we are not focused on having a very large issue because our external finance position is relatively fine at this point in time, so we have no desperation to go and borrow. But we have appointed an advisor there as well. And the thought process is that we want to follow the Egyptian model. The way Egypt got credit enhancement, in their case, they got it from AIB and African Development Bank. We have also initiated discussions around that credit enhancement so that we can at least go and do an initial print by the time this fiscal year is done.
Interesting. Thank you. With your permission, Mr. Minister, I know we're running out of time, but I was hoping we could do one quick round of maybe 2 or 3 more questions for you to respond to and offer a final word. So I know there's a question right up here. Then we'll go over here, and then Marvin, the gentleman in the middle right there. So we'll start over here.
Thank you, Michael. Sanjay Kathuria, formerly from the World Bank, and now Wilson, Georgetown, and other places. Thank you very much, Minister, for that very comprehensive overview of the economy. My concern really relates to long-term external sustainability. And the IMF projected $125 billion of debt servicing over a 5-year period. And you mentioned 4 priority areas of reform, but I didn't hear perhaps enough about the area of competition. You alluded to it, obviously, in terms of SOE reform and all that. But in terms of competition, the whole tariff story, the anti-export bias story, and the fact that you're still not trading with India, which I project you could increase exports by 80% up to potential. So that whole external low current account is obviously partly because of import compression. But really the way to go to growth is export growth and external account sustainability. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on how Pakistan might get there.
Well, I think your second point is very well made because when we say we want to move towards export-led, the overall thought process around import substitution and therefore the tariffs and the protection that we have provided to the local industry for the longest time, that over a period of time has to go away. Because when I say that the private sector has to lead the country, the reality is it takes 2. So the productivity has to go up in the private sector as well. That's the only way we are going to go in that direction as well. And over a period of time, the tariffs have to be reduced. The protection has to go away. And this is one part of the how part of it, that because again the what and why is known, and this tariff rationalization is very much part of our roadmap as we go forward. And one of the things which I'll just very quickly mention is that that we are now separating policy from collection. Because what has happened over years is that at the time of budget, we essentially make the math work. And so if that means imposing new duties, new custom duties, etc., yeah, then, but once you move the policy separate from the collection, at least then you can look at that medium-term objective in terms of how you enable the export competitiveness and how you. So what we are doing right now is, we are saying even the FDI which is coming in, we are looking at those, prioritizing that FDI which actually leads to exportable surplus. In terms of long-term debt sustainability, as I mentioned on the domestic side, we've moving in the right direction in terms of fiscal space which is now available. Also getting more fiscal discipline in the government. But you've studied Pakistan, our foreign exchange debt component, as I mentioned, is really two streams. And the governor was there who explained this morning to some of the institutional investors as well that it's really multilateral or bilateral. And the commercial borrowing is hardly there. The next Eurobond payment is actually not till next September. So we don't see any immediate need to do anything there at this point in time.
Thank you. Yes, your question.
Thank you. I'm Saima Somalia. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Remitly. And I apologize. I'm being brave and asking a question, even though I missed the first few minutes. So please correct me if I've just missed this part of a discussion. But as you're talking about the trade balance, from our understanding, Pakistan is like 8, 9, 10% of the GDP is remittances. And I know there's the Pakistan Remittances Initiative. Do you have any sense of how important do you view overseas remittances in the medium term for the Pakistani trade balance issue and budget issues? And I think there may be some changes coming with the Pakistan Remittances Initiative, and thought, I'd ask if you have any comments or views on those to share.
Yeah, no, I already sort of mentioned that remittance is a very, very critical component of our overall current account discussion, and they've been, holding firm. In fact, they've been going up because there's a PRI initiative, right, which is really for the blue-collared workers, and then there's the Roshan Digital Account, RDA, which is also doing sort of extremely well. We have created more incentivization for the banks through the State Bank, and for us, it's a lifeline, and it's always going to be critical as we go forward. I think if we just take the last question, because I think we have to.
I've been told we have to stop now, but if it could be a
All right.
15-second question and a 15-second response.
Yeah.
Marvin, please, quickly.
Oh, my bad.
There's only one more. Marvin Weinbaum, the Middle East Institute. Mr. Minister, it's reported that you've been in discussions with the U.S. about support for the power sector. With that as background, we know that the Iran pipeline issue remains, and that I think we can assume there's not going to be any progress on that at all. So with that in mind, how does Pakistan propose to deal with the still present penalty that it faces for not proceeding with the pipeline? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance at this point in time, and all I can say is this is work in progress. I cannot make any definitive statement on that at this point in time.
I'm glad the question was asked, so I didn't have to pose it. Well, it's been wonderful to have you with us, Minister Aurangzeb. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for being here. If we could have a final round of applause for Minister Aurangzeb.
Thank you. Thank you.